Hey everyone, how's it going? Cal Bowers here again, and I missed you all. It's been a few weeks since I've been able to sit down and read one of these things, but it's so good to be back. And you know, I didn't read them because they weren't coming in the mail. I felt like it was a good time to pause and just kind of relax a little bit, which was really nice. But today, I was going on a creek hike, as you saw, and there was this jar just sitting on the edge of the river. And as it always happens, as soon as I find another chapter, it goes directly into the book. Here, let me get it out. It just goes right back into the book, and we should be ready to go. I'm so excited to see what happens this week, and I missed reading these things. So without further ado, we'll get started with chapter 5. I can't believe we're at 5. This book is getting pretty full. All right, chapter 5. The KCISP Championship. It had been a quiet few weeks in the valley, though the world outside certainly had not been as serene. The wind continued to bellow over the summit of Flag Mountain, and the crickets had become much more motivated in the mid-month moonlight. The loons had started to make themselves heard as they floated across DHP, serenading the stars that hovered over MV. A man with a mustache, a particularly excellent mustache, it should be noted, spent Tuesday afternoons surveying the paths and hills that made up Merrowvista to make sure that the physical space was still shipshape. On this particular Tuesday, Patrick decided to take stock of the state of the out-camping equipment building, commonly known as OCE. The recent storms and commotion in the valley had not been kind to OCE. When Patrick opened up the big garage door, he was met with backpacks on the floor, disheveled tents, and dozens of mismatched hiking boots strewn about. He rolled up his sleeves and got to work tidying up, reorganizing the paddles and helmets first. Just as he finished the canoeing cleanup, he felt a tap on his shoulder. Reaching from the area near the trailers, a tree had been instructed to hand Patrick a note from the wishing tree. Wide-eyed, Patrick put down the red helmet he was holding and read the note. Earlier that day, the wishing tree had received a letter from a young man named Tyler. It read, "Dear Wishing Tree, it's Tyler from Shaw. I've been going to Merrowvista for 7 or 8 summers now, and this year I was supposed to be an adventurer. Last year was one of the best summers at MV so far. I was nervous on the first day since it was my first time doing Session A. I didn't know anybody then, but who would have thought that I would have had such an unforgettable, amazing time. Last summer was my first time as a Four Trails camper, and I had a blast. We hiked for miles, canoed through river rapids, and I even biked up Camp Hill twice. But with all the trail time, I was missing doing interest groups, night's doings, and especially the fourfold tournament. It was very different spending more time out of camp than in it, but I wouldn't trade the times we had for just about anything. There were too many laughs and songs and stories for me to want anything different. But oh, what I'd give to have another shot at the fourfold tournament. When I was a trailblazer, my team got second overall. We got the best selves plaque. I think if we had a second chance at the relay, we could have won since we already had Camp Conquest in the bag. But either way, I'm still proud of what we accomplished. Oh geez, I guess I'm really starting to realize how much I miss MV. Is camp going to be the same after all this? It's some pretty serious stuff that's going on in the world right now. But I know that Merrowvista will be back better than before. I guess I can't throw a rock through your branches right now, but I wish that by the time camp comes around next summer, we'll all be heading back into the valley. I hope you are well. Your friend, Tyler from Shaw." The fourfold tournament, you say, the wishing trees said to themselves. One of their favorite parts of the entire summer, the wishing tree looked forward to watching the week-long competition unfold at the end of each session. All the campers are split up into 6 different teams where they compete for the coveted title of fourfold champions. With each year bringing a different theme, the tree was always excited to see what the campers would come up with. There was a group, though, the tree had heard, who loved the fourfold tournament more than anything in the world. And after seeing the state of the valley, the tree knew it was time to tap into their competitive spirit. The tree shouted from the meadow towards the barn. "Open your doors! Just look at the floors! The basketball court is populated with apple cores. Fairies of the bond, protectors. You know what? We're gonna wait a second for this thing to go over. Good old helicopter. It's going. Nice promise. Yeah, I see it. It's a very pretty helicopter. Anyway, we'll start the poem over. The wishing tree shouted from the meadow to the bond, "Open your doors! Just look at the floors! The basketball court is populated with apple cores. Fairies of the bond, protectors of the tournament plaques. The camp is a mess in front of us. The usual standards have gotten lax. I hereby declare the beginning of a new kind of competition. Grab your gloves and grip your brooms. The KCISP championship is your mission." The families that make up the fairies of the bond had been living behind the championship plaques for as long as the tree could remember. Ever since the tournament started in the 1930s, the fairies had always been fans of healthy competition. So much so that they had started to build their homes in the space behind the plaques. Every year, a new family of fairies would travel to the valley where they patiently waited for the end of the fourfold relay, the last event in the tournament. After spending the week observing the incredible feats that the campers achieved, the family of fairies would base their house design on that year's theme. For example, the Space Cadet family had become so invested in the 2013 fourfold tournament that ever since they had solely worn space helmets and airtight suits to pay tribute to that year's theme. The other families did the same, as the chefs wore their tall hats, the superheroes wore capes, and the rock stars wore leather jackets and dark sunglasses. Their front doors adorned by the signatures of that year's winning team. Each family believed that their theme was the best and better than the rest of their neighbors. Each family was so set in their belief that their theme was the best that any mention of a theme that was not their own caused them to become annoyed, stubborn, and bitter. The result was that none of the families really liked each other that much, leading to a very isolating and lonely life, though the fairies would never admit it. They had heard the wishing tree's call from the meadow and opened their doors to see the man with the mustache confidently striding through the bond doors. "Hey there, no need to be scared. I've been sent by the tree," said Patrick. "Welcome to the inaugural Keep Camp in Shape Please tournament. I've heard that you have all watched the competitions over the years, and now you have the chance to have a tournament of your own. Camp has gotten a little run down due to the past week's events. It seems that the awakening has caused quite the ruckus." Patrick looked down at the note he held in his hand, provided by the wishing tree. "I call forward the Space Cadets, the KCISP, the Sentinel Biff, the Rock Stars to conquer OCE and OCF. The Rock Stars, I'm sorry, let me start it again. I call forward the Space Cadets, the KCISP, the Sentinel Biff, the Rock Stars to New Hampshire Lodge. Superheroes, you are tasked with the Super Biff, and the chefs must conquer OCE and OCF. The family that best cleans their space will be crowned champion of this historic tournament, and their doors shall be decorated with a crest to commemorate their accomplishment." The four families stood on the doorsteps listening to Patrick in amazement, as no human had ever recognized their presence before. As soon as they heard that the tree had organized a tournament for them to compete in, their attention was immediately captured. As they listened to Patrick, they gave side-eyed looks to their neighbors, scoffing at their silly outfits. When Patrick was finished, they immediately ran back into their homes to collect all the cleaning supplies they could muster. Miniature buckets with miniature mops, tiny brooms and tiny bristles, and small spray bottles with even smaller rags started to appear on their porches as the fairies bustled in excitement. 10 minutes later, the chefs, rock stars, space cadets, and superheroes stood on their porches, ready to begin. Patrick had gotten a whistle from the athletic shed, which had somehow stayed in perfect condition despite the storms. The people who cleaned it last summer must have done an exceptionally good job. Patrick said, "When I blow this whistle, the competition is officially underway. Scrub, sweep, conquer." From under his mustache, Patrick blew the whistle, and the fairies flew out the front door of the bond, cleaning supplies in hand. Their wings flapped and fluttered as they flew to their assigned locations. For the next 2 hours, the fairies busily cleaned and organized as best as they could. Toilets were polished by hovering sprites. Floors were mopped meticulously. Countertops were wiped with gusto. Any dirt on the floors was history. The tall-hatted chef reorganized the tents and backpacks in OCE, while the rock stars tackled the costume bin in New Hampshire Lodge. The Wishing Tree and Patrick observed the extraordinary effort taking place at all 4 locations, and both had a hard time trying to figure out who was doing the best job. By the time the early afternoon rolled around, the fairies had all but finished their spaces. Covered in dust, sweaty and tired, the fairies returned to the bond to report back to Patrick. They had all hoped that their family did a better job than the rest of their neighbors, as the idea of being crowned champion was what had made them work so hard in the first place. While the fairies were cleaning, Patrick noticed a dismal fact. The bell had been knocked over sometime in the last few weeks. Due to all the commotion going on, he hadn't noticed that the huge bronze bell laid on its side near the bond. He sighed. He knew the bell was far too heavy for him to pick up on his own, yet he decided to try anyway. With all his might, Patrick attempted to lift the bell from the ground, but to no avail. As the families of fairies returned from their respective locations, they saw Patrick struggling to lift the bell. The rock stars were the first to finish, and they decided to give their new friend a hand. Still, even with Patrick and the power of 5 fairies, the bell was still not going to budge. The chefs were the next to return, where they saw the group tirelessly trying to lift the bell. While their rivalry with the rock stars was deep, and for good reason, the chefs rushed to help lift. The bell started to move, but fell quickly back to the ground, despite the addition of 5 more sets of hands and wings. Patrick and the 2 families collapsed to the ground, panting and coughing. The space cadets and superheroes, who had just returned from their tasks, looked at each other and nodded. Helping Patrick and the rest of the fairies off the ground, the now 20-strong fairies and Patrick gripped the bell one last time. 1, 2, 3, Patrick shouted. In a flurry of wings, the group huffed and puffed as they lifted the bell, which had finally started to move. Together, they put the bell back in its place, where it has sat for over 100 years. As soon as the bell stood tall, the group cheered and clapped each other on the backs. Patrick did a little dance. For the first time in a long time, the community of fairies celebrated together, and not just as individual families. At this point, they had forgotten that there was even a competition taking place. Patrick grabbed his banjo from the back of the golf cart, and they danced the night away as Patrick plucked and strummed. Space cadets danced with rock stars, chefs shook hands with their new friends, the superheroes. It was then that they discovered that they had a lot more in common than they thought. Their similarities far outweighed their differences, and all it took was one problem, in this case, the overturned bell, to realize that. At the end of the night, Patrick decided to crown all of the fairies with the title of KCISP champions. Together, they painted the insignia of the championship on their doors with bright red paint. The Wishing Tree shook its head once again as they continued to be surprised week after week. They hadn't imagined that this would bring the fairies together as it did. They honestly just wanted to help Patrick in cleaning up the camp, but it had turned into so much more. From then on, the fairies worked on forming a community of their own. The rock stars played shows on Friday nights. The chefs invited the other families over for dinner. The space cadets shared their knowledge of the stars and planets on clear nights, and the superheroes told stories of adventure and magic on Saturday mornings. It was clear that this event called for the placement of the next artifact. The tree sent a miniature broom made of stone to the circle, where it was placed in the space next to the 3 other artifacts. The circle was starting to become full of these artifacts, with now the adventurer section being represented. Adventurers, a pivotal moment in a camper's Merrowvista experience, where campers learn not just to talk the talk, but to really walk the walk. The fire in the center gained strength as each artifact placed seemed to fuel it exponentially. The flames burned bright with a purple glow. From the top of Flag, you could see the luminous light flickering below. "It's so good to be back," the Wishing Tree said out loud to nobody in particular. End of chapter 5. That was a beautiful chapter. Now there's something going on in the bushes over there, but anyway, that was a really nice one. I really like that. The story of the fairies and helping Patrick lift up the bell. You all know Patrick, right? The guy with the big mustache who walks around on the golf cart. It's so cool to see him in there. I want to give a really big shout out this week to Tyler. Tyler reached out and he actually wrote the camper letter this week. So here to Tyler. Again, if you ever want to write something for this story or send a letter to the Wishing Tree, I'll put the email right here and you can do that. And I'll also share Tyler's art that he also wrote. He also painted for this story, which is awesome. Thank you so much for being here. It's so exciting to be back, and we'll see you all next week. Thanks.
On the loose to climb a mountain, on the loose where I am free, on the loose to live my life the way I think my life should be. For I've only got a moment in this whole world yet to see. I'll be looking for tomorrow on the loose.